Preface of the Holy War. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Joy Chan. The Holy War, made by Shaddai upon Diabolus for the regaining of the metropolis of the world. Or, The Losing and Taking Again of the Town of Man's Soul, by John Bunyan. To the Reader. 'Tis strange to me that they that love to tell things done of old, yea, and that do excel their equals in historiology, speak not of man's soul's wars, but let them lie dead, like old fables or such worthless things that to the reader no advantage brings. When men, let them make what they will their own, till they know this, are to themselves unknown. Of stories I well know, there's divers sorts, some foreign, some domestic, and reports are thereof made as fancy leads the writers. By books a man may guess at the inditers. Some will again of that which never was, nor will be, feign, and that without a cause, such matter, raise such mountains, tell such things, of men, of laws, of countries, and of kings. And in their story seems to be so sage, and with such gravity clothe every page, that though their frontispiece says all is vain, yet to their way disciples they obtain. But, readers, I have somewhat else to do, than with vain stories thus to trouble you. What here I say, some men do know so well, they can with tears and joy the story tell. The town of Man's Soul is well known to many, nor are her troubles doubted of by any that are acquainted with those histories that man's soul and her wars anatomize. Then lend thine ear to what I do relate, touching the town of Man's Soul and her state, how she was lost, took captive, made a slave, and how against him set that should her save. Yea, how by hostile ways she did oppose her lord, and with his enemy did close. For they are true, he that will them deny must needs the best of records vilify. For my part, I myself was in the town, both when 'twas set up and when pulling down. I saw Diabolus in his possession, and man's soul also under his oppression. Yea, I was there when she owned him for lord, and to him did submit with one accord. When man's soul trampled upon things divine, and wallowed in filth as doth a swine, when she betook herself unto her arms, fought her Emmanuel, despised his charms. Then I was there, and did rejoice to see Diabolus and man's soul so agree. Let no men then count me a fable maker, nor make my name or credit a partaker of their derision. What is here in view, of mine own knowledge I dare say is true. I saw the prince's armed men come down, by troops, by thousands, to besiege the town. I saw the captains, heard the trumpet sound, and how his forces covered all the ground. Yea, how they set themselves in battle ray, I shall remember to my dying day. I saw the colours waving in the wind, and they within to mischief how combined, to ruin man's soul, and to make away her primum mobile without delay. I saw the mounts cast up against the town, and how the slings were placed to beat it down. I heard the stones fly whizzing by mine ears, what longer kept in mind than got in fears? I heard them fall, and saw what work they made, and how old Mors did cover with his shade the face of man's soul. And I heard her cry, Woe worth the day, in dying I shall die. I saw the battering rams, and how they played to beat ope Eargate. I was afraid not only Eargate, but the very town would by those battering rams be beaten down. I saw the fights and heard the captains shout, and in each battle saw who faced about. I saw who wounded were, and who were slain, and who, when dead, would come to life again. I heard the cries of those that wounded were, while others fought like men bereft of fear. And while the cry, Kill, kill, was in mine ears, the gutters ran not so with blood as tears. Indeed the captains did not always fight, But then they would molest us day and night. Their cry, "Up, fall on, let us take the town," kept us from sleeping or from lying down. I was there when the gates were broken ope, and saw how man's soul then was stripped of hope. I saw the captains march into the town, how there they fought and did their foes cut down. I heard the prince bid Boanerges go up to the castle and there seize his foe, and saw him and his fellows bring him down in chains of great contempt quite through the town. I saw Emmanuel when he possessed his town of man's soul, and how greatly blessed a town his gallant town of man's soul was, when she received his pardon, loved his laws. When the Diabolonians were caught, when tried, and when to execution brought, then I was there. Yea, I was standing by, when man's soul did the rebels crucify. I also saw man's soul clad all in white. I heard her prince call her his heart's delight. I saw him put upon her chains of gold, and rings and bracelets goodly to behold. What shall I say? I heard the people's cries, and saw the prince wipe tears from man's soul's eyes. I heard the groans and saw the joy of many. Tell you of all I neither will nor can I. But by what here I say, you well may see that man's soul's matchless wars no fables be. Man's soul, the desire of both princes was. One keep his gain would, t'other gain his loss. Diabolus would cry, "The town is mine!" Emmanuel would plead it right divine unto his man's soul. Then to blows they go, and man's soul cries, "These wars will me undo." Man's soul, her wars seemed endless in her eyes. She's lost by one, becomes another's prize. And he again that lost her last would swear, "Have her I will, or her in pieces tear." Man's soul, it was the very seat of war. Wherefore her troubles greater were by far than only where the noise of war is heard, or where the shaking of a sword is feared, or only where small skirmishes are fought, or where the fancy fighteth with a thought. She saw the swords of fighting men made red, and heard the cries of those with them wounded. Must not her frights, then, be much more by far than theirs that to such doings strangers are? Or theirs that hear the beating of a drum, but not made fly from fear from house and home? Man's soul not only heard the trumpet's sound, but saw her gallants gasping on the ground. Wherefore we must not think that she could rest with them whose greatest earnest is but jest, or where the blustering threatening of great wars do end in parleys or in wording jars. Man's soul, her mighty wars they did pretend, her weal, her woe, and that world without end. Wherefore she must be more concerned than they whose fears begin and end the self-same day, or where none other harm doth come to him that is engaged, but loss of life or limb. As all must needs confess that now do dwell in universe and can this story tell. Count me not, then, with them that, to amaze the people, set them on the stars to gaze, insinuating with much confidence that each of them is now the residence of some brave creatures. Yea, a world they will have in each star, though it be past their skill to make it manifest to any man, that reason hath or tell his fingers can. But I have too long held thee in the porch, and kept thee from the sunshine with a torch. Well, now go forward, step within the door, and there behold 500 times much more of all sorts of such inward rarities as please the mind will, and will feed the eyes with those which, if a Christian, thou wilt see not small, but things of greatest moment be. Nor do thou go to work without my key. In mysteries men soon do lose their way, and also turn it right, if thou wouldst know my riddle, and wouldst with my heifer plough. It lies there in the window. Fare thee well, my next may be to ring thy passing bell. John Bunyan. An advertisement to the reader. Some say the Pilgrim's Progress is not mine, insinuating as if I would shine in name and fame by the worth of another, like some made rich by robbing of their brother. Or that so fond I am of being sire, I'll father bastards, or, if need require, I'll tell a lie in print to get applause. I scorn it. John such dirt heap never was since God converted him. Let this suffice to show why I my pilgrim patronize. It came from mine own heart, so to my head, and thence into my fingers trickled, then to my pen, from whence immediately on paper I did dribble it daintily. Manner and matter, too, was all mine own, nor was it unto any mortal known till I had done it, nor did any then by books, by wits, by tongues, or hand or pen, add 5 words to it, or wrote half a line thereof. The whole and every whit is mine. Also for this thine eye is now open. The matter in this manner came from none but the same heart, and head, fingers, and pen, as did the other. Witness all good men, for none in all the world, without a lie, can say that this is mine, excepting I. I write not this of my ostentation, nor cause I seek of men their commendation. I do it to keep them from such surmise as tempt them will my name to scandalize. Witness my name, if anagrammed to thee, the letters make new honey in a bee. John Bunyan. End of preface. Chapter 1 of The Holy War. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Joy Chan. The Holy War by John Bunyan. Chapter 1. Relation of the Holy War. In my travels, as I walked through many regions and countries, it was my chance to happen into that famous continent of universe. A very large and spacious country it is. It lieth between the 2 poles, and just amidst the 4 points of the heavens. It is a place well watered, and richly adorned with hills and valleys, bravely situate, and for the most part, at least where I was, very fruitful, also well peopled, and a very sweet air. The people are not all of one complexion, nor yet of one language, mode, or way of religion, but differ as much as, it is said, do the planets themselves. Some are right and some are wrong, even as it happeneth to be in lesser regions. In this country, as I said, it was my lot to travel, and there travel I did, and that so long, even till I learned much of their mother tongue, together with the customs and manners of them among whom I was. And, to speak truth, I was much delighted to see and hear many things which I saw and heard among them. Yea, I had, to be sure, even lived and died a native among them, so was I taken with them in their doings, had not my master sent for me home to his house, there to do business for him, and to oversee business done. Now there is in this gallant country of universe a fair and delicate town, a corporation called Man's Soul, a town for its building so curious, for its situation so commodious, for its privileges so advantageous, I mean with reference to its origin, that I may say of it, as was said before of the continent in which it is placed, there is not its equal under the whole heaven. As to the situation of this town, it lieth just between the 2 worlds, and the first founder and builder of it, so far as by the best and most authentic records I can gather, was one Shaddai, and he built it for his own delight. He made it the mirror and glory of all that he made, even the top piece, beyond anything else that he did in that country. Yea, so goodly a town was Man's Soul when first built, that it is said by some, the gods at the setting up thereof came down to see it, and sang for joy. And as he made it goodly to behold, so also mighty to have dominion over all the country round about. Yea, all were commanded to acknowledge Man's Soul for their metropolitan, all were enjoined to do homage to it. Ay, the town itself had positive commission and power from her king to demand service of all, and also to subdue any that anyways denied to do it. There was reared up in the midst of this town a most famous and stately palace. For strength it might be called a castle, for pleasantness a paradise. for largeness a place so copious as to contain all the world. This place the king Shaddai intended but for himself alone, and not another with him, partly because of his own delights, and partly because he would not that the terror of strangers should be upon the town. This place Shaddai made also a garrison of, but committed the keeping of it only to the men of the town. The walls of the town were well built, yea, so fast and firm were they knit and compact together that, had it not been for the townsmen themselves, they could not have been shaken or broken for ever. For here lay the excellent wisdom of him that builded man's soul, that the walls could never be broken down nor hurt by the most mighty adverse potentate, unless the townsmen gave consent thereto. This famous town of man's soul had 5 gates, in at which to come, out of which to go, and these were made likewise answerable to the walls, to wit, impregnable, and such as could never be opened nor forced but by the will and leave of those within. The names of the gates were these: Ear-gate, Eye-gate, Mouth-gate, Nose-gate, and Feel-gate. Other things there were that belonged to the town of man's soul, which, if you adjoin to these, will yet give further demonstration to all of the glory and strength of the place. It had always a sufficiency of provision within its walls. It had the best, most wholesome and excellent law, that then was extant in the world. There was not a rascal, rogue, or traitorous person then within its walls. They were all true men, and fast joined together. And this, you know, is a great matter. And to all these it had always, so long as it had the goodness to keep true to Shaddai the king, his countenance, his protection, and it was his delight, etc. Well, upon a time there was one Diabolus, a mighty giant, made an assault upon this famous town of man's soul, to take it and make it his own habitation. This giant was king of the blacks, and a most raving prince he was. We will, if you please, first discourse on the origin of this Diabolus, and then of his taking of this famous town of man's soul. This Diabolus is indeed a great and mighty prince, and yet both poor and beggarly. As to his origin, he was at first one of the servants of King Shaddai, made and taken and put by him into most high and mighty place. Yea, was put into such principalities as belonged to the best of his territories and dominions. This Diabolus was made son of the morning, and a brave place he had of it. It brought him much glory, and gave him much brightness, an income that might have contented his Luciferian heart, had it not been insatiable, and enlarged as hell itself. Well, he seeing himself thus exalted to greatness and honour, and raging in his mind for high estate and degree, what doth he but begins to think with himself how he might be set up as lord over all, and have the sole power under Shaddai. Now that did the king reserve for his son, yea, and had already bestowed it upon him. Wherefore he first consults with himself what had best to be done, and then breaks his mind to some other of his companions, to the which they also agreed. So, in fine, they came to this issue, that they should make an attempt upon the king's son to destroy him, that the inheritance might be theirs. Well, to be short, the treason, as I said, was concluded, the time appointed, the word given, the rebels rendezvoused, and the assault attempted. Now the king and his son, being all and always I, could not but discern all passages in his dominions, and he, having always love for his son as for himself, could not at what he saw but be greatly provoked and offended. Wherefore what does he, but takes them in the very nick and first trip that they made towards their design, convicts them of the treason, horrid rebellion, and conspiracy that they had devised, and now attempted to put into practice, and casts them altogether out of all place of trust, benefit, honour, and preferment. This done, he banishes them the court, turns them down into the horrible pits, as fast bound in chains, never more to expect the least favour from his hands, but to abide the judgment that he had appointed, and that for ever. Now they being thus cast out of all place of trust, profit, and honour, and also knowing that they had lost their prince's favour for ever, being banished his court and cast down to the horrible pits, you may be sure they would now add to their former pride what malice and rage against Shaddai, and against his son, they could. Wherefore, roving and ranging in much fury from place to place, if perhaps they might find something that was the king's, by spoiling of that to revenge themselves on him, at last they happened into this spacious country of universe, and steer their course towards the town of Mansoul. And considering that that town was one of the chief works and delights of King Shaddai, what do they, but, after counsel taken, make an assault upon that? I say they knew that Mansoul belonged unto Shaddai, for they were there when he built it, and beautified it for himself. So when they had found the place, they shouted horribly for joy, and roared on it as a lion upon the prey, saying, Now we have found the prize, and how to be revenged on King Shaddai for what he hath done to us. So they sat down and called a council of war, and considered with themselves what ways and methods they had best to engage in for the winning to themselves this famous town of Mansoul. And these 4 things were then propounded to be considered of. First, whether they had best all of them to show themselves in this design to the town of Mansoul. Secondly, whether they had best to go and sit down against Mansoul in their now ragged and beggarly disguise. Thirdly, whether they had best show to Mansoul their intentions, and what design they came about, or whether to assault it with words and ways of deceit. Fourthly, whether they had not best to some of their companions to give out private orders to take the advantage, if they see one or more of the principal townsmen, to shoot them, if thereby they shall judge their cause and design will the better be promoted. 1. It was answered to the first of these proposals in the negative, to wit, that it would not be best that all should show themselves before the town, because the appearance of many of them might alarm and frighten the town, whereas a few, or but one of them, was not so likely to do it. And to enforce this advice to take place, it was added further, that if Mansoul was frighted, or did take the alarm, "It is impossible," said Diabolus, for he spake now, "that we should take the town, for that none can enter into it without its consent. Let therefore but few, or but one, assault Mansoul, and in mine opinion, said Diabolus, let me be he. Wherefore to this they all agreed. 2. And then to the second proposal they came, namely, whether they had best go and sit down before Mansoul in their now ragged and beggarly guise. To which it was answered also in the negative, by no means, and that because, though the town of Mansoul had been made to know and to have to do before now with things that are invisible, they did never as yet see any of their fellow creatures in so sad and rascally condition as they. And this was the advice of that fierce Elector. Then said Apollyon, The advice is pertinent, for even one of us appearing to them as we are now, must needs both beget and multiply such thoughts in them as will both put them into a consternation of spirit, and necessitate them to put themselves upon their guard. And if so, said he, then, as my lord Diabolus said but now, it is in vain for us to think of taking the town. Then said that mighty giant Beelzebub, The advice that already is given is safe, for though the men of Mansoul have seen such things as we once were, yet hitherto they did never behold such things as we now are, and it is best, in mine opinion, to come upon them in such a guise as is common to and most familiar among them. To this, when they had consented, the next thing to be considered was, in what shape, hue, or guise Diabolus had best to show himself when he went about to make Mansoul his own. Then one said one thing and another the contrary. At last Lucifer answered that, in his opinion, it was best that his lordship should assume the body of some of those creatures that they of the town had dominion over. For, quoth he, these are not only familiar to them, but, being under them, they will never imagine that an attempt should by them be made upon the town. And, to blind all, let him assume the body of one of those beasts that Mansoul deems to be wiser than any of the rest. This advice was applauded of all. So it was determined that the giant Diabolus should assume the dragon, for that he was in those days as familiar with the town of Mansoul as now is the bird with the boy. For nothing that was in its primitive state was at all amazing to them. Then they proceeded to the third thing, which was 3. Whether they had best to show their intentions, or the design of his coming, to Mansoul or no. This also was answered in the negative, because of the weight that was in the former reasons, to wit, for that Mansoul were a strong people in a strong town, whose wall and gates were impregnable, to say nothing of their castle, nor can they by any means be won but by their own consent. Besides, said Legion, for he gave answer to this, a discovery of our intentions may make them send to their king for aid, and if that be done, I know quickly what time of day it will be with us. Therefore let us assault them in all pretended fairness, covering our intentions with all manner of lies, flatteries, delusive words, feigning things that never will be, and promising that to them that they shall never find. This is the way to win man's soul, and to make them of themselves open their gates to us, yea, and to desire us too to come into them. And the reason why I think that this project will do is, because the people of man's soul now are every one simple and innocent, all honest and true, nor do they as yet know what it is to be assaulted with fraud, guile, and hypocrisy. They are strangers to lying and dissembling lips, wherefore we cannot, if thus we be disguised, by them at all be discerned. Our lies shall go for true sayings, and our dissimulations for upright dealings. What we promise them they will in that believe us, especially if, in all our lies and feigned words, we pretend great love to them, and that our design is only their advantage and honour. Now there was not one bit of a reply against this. This went as current down as doth the water down a deep descent. Wherefore they go to consider of the last proposal, which was 4. Whether they had not best to give out orders to some of their company to shoot some one or more of the principal of the townsmen, if they judge that their cause may be promoted thereby. This was carried in the affirmative, and the man that was designed by this stratagem to be destroyed was one Mr. Resistance, otherwise called Captain Resistance. And a great man in man's soul this Captain Resistance was, and a man that the giant Diabolus and his band more feared than they feared the whole town of Mansoul besides. Now who should be the actor to do the murder? That was the next, and they appointed one Tisphone, a fury of the lake, to do it. They thus having ended their council of war, rose up and essayed to do as they had determined. They marched towards Mansoul, but all in a manner invisible, save one, only one. Nor did he approach the town in his own likeness, but under the shade and in the body of the dragon. So they drew up and sat down before Eargate, for that was the place of hearing for all without the town, as Eyegate was the place of perspection. So, as I said, he came up with his train to the gate, and laid his ambuscado for Captain Resistance within bowshot of the town. This done, the giant ascended up close to the gate, and called to the town of Mansoul for audience. Nor took he any with him but one ill Pause, who was his orator in all difficult matters. Now, as I said, he being come up to the gate, as the manner of those times was, sounded his trumpet for audience, at which the chief of the town of Mansoul, such as my Lord Innocent, my Lord Will-be-will, my Lord Mayor, Mr. Recorder, and Captain Resistance, came down to the wall to see who was there, and what was the matter. And my Lord Will-be-will, when he had looked over and saw who stood at the gate, demanded what he was, wherefore he was come, and why he roused the town of Mansoul with so unusual a sound. Diabolus then, as if he had been a lamb, began his oration and said, Gentlemen of the famous town of Mansoul, I am, as you may perceive, no far dweller from you, but near, and one that is bound by the king to do you my homage and what service I can. Wherefore, that I may be faithful to myself and to you, I have somewhat of concern to impart unto you. Wherefore grant me your audience, and hear me patiently. And first I will assure you, it is not myself, but you not mine, but your advantage that I seek by what I now do, as will full well be made manifest, by that I have opened my mind unto you. For, gentlemen, I am, to tell you the truth, come to show you how you may obtain great and ample deliverance from a bondage that, unawares to yourselves, you are captivated and enslaved under. At this the town of Mansoul began to prick up its ears. And what is it? Pray, what is it? thought they. And he said, I have somewhat to say to you concerning your king, concerning his law, and also touching yourselves. Touching your king, I know he is great and potent, but yet all that he hath said to you is neither true, nor yet for your advantage. 1, it is not true, for that wherewith he hath hitherto awed you shall not come to pass, nor be fulfilled, though you do the thing that he hath forbidden. But if there was danger, what a slavery is it to live always in fear of the greatest of punishments, for doing so small and trivial a thing as eating of a little fruit is. 2, touching his laws, this I say further, they are both unreasonable, intricate, and intolerable. Unreasonable, as was hinted before, for that the punishment is not proportioned to the offence. There is a great difference and disproportion between the life and an apple. Yet the one must go for the other by the law of your Shaddai. But it is also intricate in that he saith, first, you may eat of all, and yet after forbids the eating of one. And then, in the last place, it must needs be intolerable, forasmuch as that fruit which you are forbidden to eat of, if you are forbidden any, is that and that alone which is able by your eating to minister to you a good as yet unknown by you. This is manifest by the very name of the tree. It is called the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And have you that knowledge as yet? No, no, nor can you conceive how good, how pleasant, and how much to be desired to make one wise it is, so long as you stand by your king's commandment. Why should you be holden in ignorance and blindness? Why should you not be enlarged in knowledge and understanding? And now, O ye inhabitants of the famous town of Mansoul, to speak more particularly to yourselves, you are not a free people. You are kept both in bondage and slavery, and that by a grievous threat, no reason being annexed but, so I will have it, so it shall be. And is it not grievous to think on, that that very thing which you are forbidden to do, might you but do it, would yield you both wisdom and honour? For then your eyes will be opened, and you shall be as gods. Now, since this is thus, quoth he, can you be kept by any prince in more slavery and in greater bondage than you are under this day? You are made underlings, and are wrapped up in inconveniences, as I have well made appear. For what bondage greater than to be kept in blindness? Will not reason tell you that it is better to have eyes than to be without them, and so to be at liberty to be better than to be shut up in a dark and stinking cave? And just now, while Diabolus was speaking these words to Mansoul, Tisiphone shot at Captain Resistance, where he stood on the gate, and mortally wounded him in the head, so that he, to the amazement of the townsmen and the encouragement of Diabolus, fell down dead quite over the wall. Now when Captain Resistance was dead, and he was the only man of war in the town, poor Mansoul was wholly left naked of courage, nor had she now any heart to resist. But this was as the devil would have it. Then stood forth he, Mr. Ill Pause, that Diabolus brought with him, who was his orator, and he addressed himself to speak to the town of Mansoul, the tenor of whose speech here follows. Gentlemen, quoth he, it is my master's happiness that he has this day a quiet and teachable auditory, and it is hoped by us that we shall prevail with you not to cast off good advice. My master has a very great love for you, and although, as he very well knows, that he runs the hazard of the anger of King Shaddai, yet love to you will make him do more than that. nor doth there need that a word more should be spoken to confirm for truth what he hath said. There is not a word but carries with it self-evidence in its bowels. The very name of the tree may put an end to all controversy in this matter. I therefore at this time shall only add this advice to you, under and by the leave of my lord, and with that he made Diabolus a very low congee. Consider his words. Look on the tree and the promising fruit thereof. Remember also that yet you know but little, and that this is the way to know more. And if your reasons be not conquered to accept of such good counsel, you are not the men that I took you to be. But when the townsfolk saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eye, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, they did as old ill Pause advised. They took and did eat thereof. Now this I should have told you before, that even then, when this ill Pause was making his speech to the townsmen, my Lord Innocency, whether by a shot from the camp of the giant, or from some sinking qualm that suddenly took him, or whether by the stinking breath of that treacherous villain old ill Pause, for so I am most apt to think, sank down in the place where he stood, nor could be brought to life again. Thus these two brave men died. Brave men I call them, for they were the beauty and glory of man's soul, so long as they lived therein. Nor did there now remain any more a noble spirit in man's soul. They all fell down and yielded obedience to Diabolus, and became his slaves and vassals, as you shall hear. Now these being dead, what do the rest of the townsfolk, but as men that had found a fool's paradise? They presently, as afore was hinted, fall to prove the truth of the giant's words. And, first, they did as ill Pause had taught them. They looked, they considered, they were taken with the forbidden fruit. They took thereof and did eat, and having eaten, they became immediately drunken therewith. So they opened the gate, both ear gate and eye gate, and let in Diabolus with all his bands, quite forgetting their good Shaddai, his law, and the judgment that he had annexed, with solemn threatening to the breach thereof. Diabolus, having now obtained entrance in at the gates of the town, marches up to the middle thereof, to make his conquest as sure as he could. And finding by this time the affections of the people warmly inclining to him, he, as thinking it was best striking while the iron is hot, made this further deceivable speech unto them, saying, Alas, my poor man's soul, I have done thee indeed this service, as to promote thee to honour, and to greaten thy liberty. But alas, alas, poor man's soul, thou wantest now one to defend thee, for assure thyself that when Shaddai shall hear what is done, he will come. For sorry will he be that thou hast broken his bonds, and cast his cords away from thee. What wilt thou do? Wilt thou, after enlargement, suffer thy privileges to be invaded and taken away, or what wilt resolve with thyself? Then they all with one consent said to this bramble, Do thou reign over us. So he accepted the motion, and became the king of the town of Man's Soul. This being done, the next thing was to give him possession of the castle, and so of the whole strength of the town. Wherefore into the castle he goes. It was that which Shaddai built in Man's Soul for his own delight and pleasure. This now was become a den and hold for the giant Diabolus. Now, having got possession of this stately palace or castle, what doth he but makes it a garrison for himself, and strengthens and fortifies it with all sorts of provision against the king Shaddai, or those that should endeavour the regaining of it to him and his obedience again. This done, but not thinking himself yet secure enough, in the next place he bethinks himself of new modelling the town, and so he does, setting up one and putting down another at pleasure. Wherefore my Lord Mayor, whose name was my Lord Understanding, and Mr. Recorder, whose name was Mr. Conscience, these he put out of place and power. As for my Lord Mayor, though he was an understanding man, and one too that had complied with the rest of the town of Man's Soul in admitting the giant into the town, Yet Diabolus thought not fit to let him abide in his former lustre and glory, because he was a seeing man. Wherefore he darkened him, not only by taking from him his office and power, but by building an high and strong tower, just between the sun's reflections and the windows of my lord's palace, by which means his house and all, and the whole of his habitation, were made as dark as darkness itself. And thus, being alienated from the light, he became as one that was born blind. To this his house my lord was confined as to a prison, nor might he upon his parole go farther than within his own bounds. And now, had he had an heart to do for man's soul, what could he do for it, or wherein could he be profitable to her? So then, so long as man's soul was under the power and government of Diabolus, and so long it was under him, as it was obedient to him, which was even until by a war it was rescued out of his hand, so long my Lord Mayor was rather an impediment in, than an advantage to the famous town of Mansoul. As for Mr. Recorder, before the town was taken, he was a man well read in the laws of his king, and also a man of courage and faithfulness to speak truth at every occasion. And he had a tongue as bravely hung as he had a head filled with judgment. Now this man Diabolus could by no means abide, because, though he gave his consent to his coming into the town, yet he could not, by all the wiles, trials, stratagems, and devices that he could use, make him wholly his own. True, he was much degenerated from his former king, and also much pleased with many of the giant's laws and service. But all this would not do, forasmuch as he was not wholly his. He would now and then think upon Shaddai, and have dread of his law upon him. And then he would speak against Diabolus with a voice as great as when a lion roareth. Yea, and would also at certain times, when his fits were upon him, for you must know that sometimes he had terrible fits, make the whole town of Mansoul shake with his voice. And therefore the now king of Mansoul could not abide him. Diabolus therefore feared the Recorder more than any that was left alive in the town of Mansoul, because, as I said, his words did shake the whole town. They were like the rattling thunder, and also like thunderclaps. Since therefore the giant could not make him wholly his own, what doth he do but studies all that he could to debauch the old gentleman, and by debauchery to stupefy his mind, and more harden his heart in the ways of vanity. And as he attempted, so he accomplished his design. He debauched the man, and by little and little so drew him into sin and wickedness, that at last he was not only debauched as at first, and so by consequence defiled, but was almost, at last I say, past all conscience of sin. And this was the farthest Diabolus could go. Wherefore he bethinks him of another project, and that was to persuade the men of the town that Mr. Recorder was mad, and so not to be regarded. And for this he urged his fits, and said, If he be himself, why doth he not do thus always? But, quoth he, as all mad folks have their fits, and in them their raving language, so hath this old and doting gentleman. Thus, by one means or another, he quickly got man's soul to slight neglect, and despise whatever Mr. Recorder could say. For, besides what already you have heard, Diabolus had a way to make the old gentleman, when he was merry, unsay and deny what he in his fits had affirmed. And, indeed, this was the next way to make himself ridiculous, and to cause that no man should regard him. Also now he never spake freely for King Shaddai, but also by force and constraint. Besides, he would at one time be hot against that at which at another he would hold his peace. So uneven was he now in his doings. Sometimes he would be as if fast asleep, and again sometimes as dead, even then when the whole town of Mansoul was in her career after vanity, and in her dance after the giant's pipe. Wherefore, sometimes when Mansoul did use to be frighted with the thundering voice of the Recorder that was, and when they did tell Diabolus of it, he would answer that what the old gentleman said was neither of love to him nor pity to them, but of a foolish fondness that he had to be prating, and so would hush still and put all to quiet again. And that he might leave no argument unurged that might tend to make them secure, he said, and said it often, "O man's soul, consider that, notwithstanding the old gentleman's rage and the rattle of his high and thundering words, you hear nothing of Shaddai himself." When liar and deceiver that he was, every outcry of Mr. Recorder against the sin of man's soul was the voice of God in him to them. But he goes on and says, "You see that he values not the loss nor rebellion of the town of man's soul, nor will he trouble himself with calling his town to a reckoning for their giving themselves to me. He knows that though you were his, now you are lawfully mine. So, leaving us one to another, he now hath shaken his hands of us. Moreover, man's soul," quoth he, "consider how I have served you, even to the uttermost of my power, and that with the best that I have, could get, or procure for you in all the world. Besides, I dare say that the laws and customs that you now are under, and by which you do homage to me, do yield you more solace and content than did the paradise that at first you possessed. Your liberty also, as yourselves do very well know, has been greatly widened and enlarged by me, whereas I found you a penned-up people. I have not laid any restraint upon you. You have no law, statute, or judgment of mine to fright you. I call none of you to account for your doings, except the madman. You know who I mean. I have granted you to live, each man like a prince in his own, even with as little control from me as I myself have from you." And thus would Diabolus hush up and quiet the town of man's soul, when the Recorder that was did at times molest them. Yea, and with such cursed orations as these, would set the whole town in a rage and fury against the old gentleman. Yea, the rascal crew at some times would be for destroying him. They have often wished, in my hearing, that he had lived 1,000 miles off from them. His company, his words, yea, the sight of him, and especially when they remembered how in old times he did use to threaten and condemn them, for all he was now so debauched, did terrify and afflict them sore. But all wishes were vain, for I do not know how, unless by the power of Shaddai and his wisdom, he was preserved in being amongst them. Besides, his house was as strong as a castle, and stood hard by a stronghold of the town. Moreover, if at any time any of the crew or rabble attempted to make him away, he could pull up the sluices and let in such floods as would drown all round about him. But to leave Mr. Recorder, and to come to my Lord Will-be-will, another of the gentry of the famous town of man's soul. This Will-be-will was as high-born as any man in man's soul, and was as much, if not more, a freeholder than many of them were. Besides, if I remember my tale aright, he had some privileges peculiar to himself in the famous town of man's soul. Now, together with these, he was a man of great strength, resolution, and courage, nor in his occasion could any turn him away. But I say, whether he was proud of his estate, privileges, strength, or what, but sure it was through pride of something. He scorns now to be a slave in man's soul, and therefore resolves to bear office under Diabolus, that he might, such an one as he was, be a petty ruler and governor in man's soul. And headstrong man that he was, thus he began betimes. For this man, when Diabolus did make his oration at Eargate, was one of the first that was for consenting to his words, and for accepting his counsel as wholesome, and that was for the opening of the gate, and for letting him into the town. Wherefore Diabolus had a kindness for him, and therefore he designed for him a place, and perceiving the valour and stoutness of the man, he coveted to have him for one of his great ones, to act and do in matters of the highest concern. So he sent for him, and talked with him of that secret matter that lay in his breast, but there needed not much persuasion in the case. For as at first he was willing that Diabolus should be let into the town, so now he was as willing to serve him there. When the tyrant therefore perceived the willingness of my lord to serve him, and that his mind stood bending that way, he forthwith made him the captain of the castle, governor of the wall, and keeper of the gates of Mansoul. Yea, there was a clause in his commission that nothing without him should be done in all the town of Mansoul. So that now, next to Diabolus himself, who but my lord Will-be-will in all the town of Mansoul, nor could anything now be done but at his will and pleasure throughout the town of Mansoul. He had also one Mr. Mind for his clerk, a man to speak on every way like his master, for he and his lord were in principle one, and in practice not far asunder. And now was Mansoul brought under to purpose, and made to fulfil the lusts of the will and of the mind. But it will not out of my thoughts what a desperate one this Will-be-will was, when power was put into his hand. First, he flatly denied that he owed any suit or service to his former prince and liege lord. This done, in the next place he took an oath and swore fidelity to his great master Diabolus, and then, being stated and settled in his places, offices, advancements, and preferments, oh, you cannot think, unless you had seen it, the strange work that this workman made in the town of Mansoul. First he maligned Mr. Recorder to death. He would neither endure to see him, nor hear the words of his mouth. He would shut his eyes when he saw him, and stop his ears when he heard him speak. Also he could not endure that so much as a fragment of the law of Shaddai should be anywhere seen in the town. For example, his clerk, Mr. Mind, had some old, rent, and torn parchments of the law of Shaddai in his house, but when Will-be-will saw them, he cast them behind his back. True, Mr. Recorder had some of the laws in his study, but my lord could by no means come at them. He also thought and said that the windows of my old Lord Mayor's house were always too light for the profit of the town of Mansoul. The light of a candle he could not endure. Now nothing at all pleased Will-be-will but what pleased Diabolus his lord. There was none like him to trumpet about the streets the brave nature, the wise conduct, and great glory of the king Diabolus. He would range and rove throughout all the streets of Mansoul to cry up his illustrious lord, and would make himself even as an object among the base and rascal crew, to cry up his valiant prince. And, I say, when and wheresoever he found these vassals, he would even make himself as one of them. In all ill courses he would act without bidding, and do mischief without commandment. The Lord Will-be-will also had a deputy under him, and his name was Mr. Affection, one that was also greatly debauched in his principles, and answerable thereto in his life. He was wholly given to the flesh, and therefore they called him Vile Affection. Now there was he in one carnal lust, the daughter of Mr. Mind, like to like, that fell in love, and made a match, and were married. And, as I take it, they had several children, as impudent, black-mouth, and hate-reproof. These 3 were black boys, and besides these they had 3 daughters, as Scorn-truth and Slight-God, and the name of the youngest was Revenge. These were all married in the town, and also begot and yielded many bad brats, too many to be here inserted. But to pass by this. End of chapter 1. Chapter 2 of the Holy War. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Joy Chan. The Holy War by John Bunyan. Chapter 2. When the giant had thus engarrisoned himself in the town of Mansoul, and had put down and set up whom he thought good, he betakes himself to defacing. Now there was in the market-place in Mansoul, and also upon the gates of the castle, an image of the blessed King Shaddai. This image was so exactly engraven, and it was engraven in gold, that it did the most resemble Shaddai himself of anything that then was extant in the world. This he basely commanded to be defaced, and it was as basely done by the hand of Mr. No-Truth. Now you must know that, as Diabolus had commanded, and that by the hand of Mr. No-Truth, the image of Shaddai was defaced. He likewise gave order that the same Mr. No-Truth should set up in its stead the horrid and formidable image of Diabolus, to the great contempt of the former king, and debasing of his town of Mansoul. Moreover, Diabolus made havoc of all remains of the laws and statutes of Shaddai that could be found in the town of Mansoul, to wit, such as contained either the doctrines of morals, with all civil and natural documents. Also relative severities he sought to extinguish. To be short, there was nothing of the remains of good in man's soul which he and Will-be-will sought not to destroy. For their design was to turn man's soul into a brute, and to make it like to the sensual sow, by the hand of Mr. No-Truth. When he had destroyed what law and good orders he could, then further to effect his design, namely, to alienate man's soul from Shaddai her king, he commands, and they set up his own vain edicts, statutes, and commandments, in all places of resort or concourse in man's soul, to wit, such as gave liberty to the lusts of the flesh, the lusts of the eyes, and the pride of life, which are not of Shaddai, but of the world. He encouraged, countenanced, and promoted lasciviousness and all ungodliness there. Yea, much more did Diabolus to encourage wickedness in the town of Mansoul. He promised them peace, content, joy, and bliss in doing his commands, and that they should never be called to an account for their not doing the contrary. And let this serve to give a taste to them that love to hear tell of what is done beyond their knowledge afar off in other countries. Now man's soul being wholly at his beck, and brought wholly to his bow, nothing was heard or seen therein but that which tended to set up him. But now he, having disabled the Lord Mayor and Mr. Recorder from bearing of office in man's soul, and seeing that the town, before he came to it, was the most ancient of corporations in the world, and fearing, if he did not maintain greatness, they at any time should object that he had done them an injury. Therefore, I say, that they might see that he did not intend to lessen their grandeur, or to take from them any of their advantageous things. He did choose for them a Lord Mayor and a Recorder himself, and such as contented them at the heart, and such also as pleased him wondrous well. The name of the Mayor that was of Diabolus's making was the Lord Lustings, a man that had neither eyes nor ears. All that he did, whether as a man or an officer, he did it naturally, as doth the beast. And that which made him yet the more ignoble, though not to man's soul, yet to them that beheld and were grieved for its ruin, was, that he never could favour good, but evil. The Recorder was one whose name was Forget Good, and a very sorry fellow he was. He could remember nothing but mischief, and to do it with delight. He was naturally prone to do things that were hurtful, even hurtful to the town of Mansoul, and to all the dwellers there. These two, therefore, by their power and practice, examples and smiles upon evil, did much more grammar and settle the common people in hurtful ways. For who doth not perceive that when those that sit aloft are vile and corrupt themselves, they corrupt the whole region and country where they are? Besides these, Diabolus made several burgesses and aldermen in Mansoul, such as out of whom the town, when it needed, might choose them officers, governors, and magistrates. And these are the names of the chief of them: Mr. Incredulity, Mr. Haughty, Mr. Swearing, Mr. Whoring, Mr. Hard Heart, Mr. Pitiless, Mr. Fury, Mr. No Truth, Mr. Stand to Lies, Mr. False Peace, Mr. Drunkenness, Mr. Cheating, Mr. Atheism. 13 in all. Mr. Incredulity is the eldest, and Mr. Atheism the youngest of the company. There was also an election of common councilmen and others, as bailiffs, sergeants, constables, and others. But all of them like to those aforenamed, being either fathers, brothers, cousins, or nephews to them, whose names, for brevity's sake, I omit to mention. When the giant had thus far proceeded in his work, in the next place he betook him to build some strongholds in the town, and he built 3 that seemed to be impregnable. The first he called the Hold of Defiance, because it was made to command the whole town, and to keep it from the knowledge of its ancient king. The second he called Midnight Hold, because it was built on purpose to keep man's soul from the true knowledge of itself. The third was called Sweet Sin Hold, because by that he fortified man's soul against all desires of good. The first of these holds stood close by Eye Gate, that, as much might be, light might be darkened there. The second was built hard by the old castle, to the end that that might be made more blind, if possible. And the third stood in the market-place. He that Diabolus made governor over the first of these was one Spite-God, a most blasphemous wretch. He came with the whole rabble of them that came against man's soul at first, and was himself one of themselves. He that was made the governor of Midnight Hold was one Love no Light. He was also of them that came first against the town. And he that was made the governor of the hold, called Sweet Sin Hold, was one whose name was Love Flesh. He was also a very lewd fellow, but not of that country where the other abound. This fellow could find more sweetness when he stood sucking off lust than he did in all the paradise of God. And now Diabolus thought himself safe. He had taken man's soul, he had engarrisoned himself therein. He had put down the old officers, and had set up new ones. He had defaced the image of Shaddai, and had set up his own. He had spoiled the old law-books, and had promoted his own vain lies. He had made him new magistrates, and set up new aldermen. He had builded him new holds, and had manned them for himself. And all this he did to make himself secure, in case the good Shaddai, or his son, should come to make an incursion upon him. Now you may well think that long before this time, word, by some or other, could not but be carried to the good King Shaddai, how his man's soul, in the continent of universe, was lost, and that the runagate giant Diabolus, once one of his Majesty's servants, had, in rebellion against the king, made sure thereof for himself. Yea, tidings were carried and brought to the king thereof, and that to a very circumstance. At first, how Diabolus came upon man's soul, they being a simple people and innocent, with craft, subtlety, lies, and guile. Item, that he had treacherously slain the right noble and valiant captain. Their captain Resistance, as he stood upon the gate with the rest of the townsmen. Item, how my brave lord Innocent fell down dead, with grief some say, or with being poisoned with the stinking breath of one ill pause, as say others, at the hearing of his just lord and rightful prince, Shaddai, so abused by the mouth of so filthy a Diabolonian as that varlet ill pause was. The messenger further told that after this ill pause had made a short oration to the townsmen in behalf of Diabolus, his master, the simple town, believing that what was said was true, with one consent did open Eargate, the chief gate of the corporation, and did let him, with his crew, into a possession of the famous town of Mansoul. He further showed how Diabolus had served the Lord Mayor and Mr. Recorder, to wit, that he had put them from all place of power and trust. Item, he showed also that my Lord Will-be-will was turned a very rebel and runagate, and that so was one Mr. Mind, his clerk, and that they two did range and revel it all the town over, and teach the wicked ones their ways. He said moreover that this Will-be-will was put into great trust, and particularly that Diabolus had put into Will-be-will's hand all the strong places in man's soul, and that Mr. Affection was made my Lord Will-be-will's deputy in his most rebellious affairs. Yea, said the messenger, this monster, Lord Will-be-will, has openly disavowed his King Shaddai, and hath horribly given his faith and plighted his troth to Diabolus. Also, said the messenger, besides all this, the new king, or rather rebellious tyrant, over the once famous, but now perishing town of Mansoul, has set up a Lord Mayor and a Recorder of his own. For Mayor he has set up one Mr. Lustings, and for Recorder Mr. Forget-Good, two of the vilest of all the town of Mansoul. This faithful messenger also proceeded, and told what a sort of new burgesses Diabolus had made. Also that he had built several strong forts, towers, and strongholds in Mansoul. He told too, the which I had almost forgot, how Diabolus had put the town of Mansoul into arms, the better to capacitate them, on his behalf, to make resistance against Shaddai their king, should he come to reduce them to their former obedience. Now this tidings-teller did not deliver his relation of things in private, but in open court, the king and his son, high lords, chief captains, and nobles, being all there present to hear. But by that they had heard the whole of the story, it would have amazed one to have seen, had he been there to behold it, what sorrow and grief and compunction of spirit there was among all sorts, to think that famous Mansoul was now taken. Only the king and his son foresaw all this long before, yea, and sufficiently provided for the relief of Mansoul, though they told not everybody thereof. Yet because they also would have a share in condoling of the misery of Mansoul, therefore they also did, and that at a rate of the highest degree, bewail the losing of Mansoul. The king said plainly that it grieved him at the heart, and you may be sure that his son was not a whit behind him. Thus gave they conviction to all about them that they had love and compassion for the famous town of Mansoul. Well, when the king and his son were retired into the privy chamber, there they again consulted about what they had designed before, to wit, that as Mansoul should in time be suffered to be lost, so as certainly it should be recovered again. Recovered, I say, in such a way as that both the king and his son would get themselves eternal fame and glory thereby. Wherefore after this consort, the son of Shaddai, a sweet and comely person, and one that had always great affection for those that were in affliction, but one that had mortal enmity in his heart against Diabolus, because he was designed for it, and because he sought his crown and dignity. This son of Shaddai, I say, having stricken hands with his father, and promised that he would be his servant to recover his Mansoul again, stood by his resolution, nor would he repent of the same. The purport of which agreement was this, to wit, that at a certain time, prefixed by both, the king's son should take a journey into the country of Universe, and there, in a way of justice and equity, by making amends for the follies of Mansoul, he should lay a foundation of perfect deliverance from Diabolus and from his tyranny. Moreover, Emmanuel resolved to make, at a time convenient, a war upon the giant Diabolus, even while he was possessed of the town of Mansoul, and that he would fairly, by strength of hand, drive him out of his hold, his nest, and take it to himself to be his habitation. This now being resolved upon, order was given to the Lord Chief Secretary to draw up a fair record of what was determined, and to cause that it should be published in all the corners of the kingdom of Universe. A short breviate of the contents thereof you may, if you please, take here as follows. Let all men know who are concerned, that the son of Shaddai, the great king, is engaged by covenant to his father to bring his Mansoul to him again, yea, and to put Mansoul too, through the power of his matchless love, into a far better and more happy condition than it was in before it was taken by Diabolus. These papers therefore were published in several places, to the no little molestation of the tyrant Diabolus. For now, thought he, I shall be molested, and my habitation will be taken from me. But when this matter, I mean this purpose of the king and his son, did at first take air at court, who can tell how the high lords, chief captains, and noble princes that were there, were taken with the business? First they whispered it one to another, and after that it began to ring out through the king's palace, all wondering at the glorious design that between the king and his son was on foot for the miserable town of Mansoul. Yea, the courtiers could scarce do anything either for the king or kingdom, but they would mix, with the doing thereof, a noise of the love of the king and his son, that they had for the town of Mansoul. Nor could these lords, high captains, and princes be content to keep this news at court. Yea, before the records thereof were perfected, themselves came down and told it in universe. At last it came to the ears, as I said, of Diabolus, to his no little discontent. For you must think it would perplex him to hear of such a design against him. Well, but after a few casts in his mind, he concluded upon these 4 things. First, that this news, these good tidings, if possible, should be kept from the ears of the town of Mansoul. For, said he, if they should once come to the knowledge that Shaddai their former king, and Emmanuel his son, are contriving good for the town of Mansoul, what can be expected by me, but that Mansoul will make a revolt from under my hand and government, and return again to him? Now, to accomplish this his design, he renews his flattery with my lord Will-be-will, and also gives him strict charge and command, that he should keep watch by day and by night at all the gates of the town, especially Ear-gate and Eye-gate. For I hear of a design, quoth he, a design to make us all traitors, and that Mansoul must be reduced to its first bondage again. I hope they are but flying stories, quoth he. However, let no such news by any means be let into Mansoul, lest the people be dejected thereat. I think, my lord, it can be no welcome news to you. I am sure it is none to me, and I think that, at this time, it should be all our wisdom and care to nip the head of all such rumours as shall tend to trouble our people. Wherefore I desire, my lord, that you will in this matter do as I say. Let there be strong guards daily kept at every gate of the town. Stop also and examine from whence such come that you perceive do from far come hither to trade, nor let them by any means be admitted into man's soul, unless you shall plainly perceive that they are favourers of our excellent government. I command, moreover, said Diabolus, that there be spies continually walking up and down the town of Mansoul, and let them have power to suppress and destroy any that they shall perceive to be plotting against us, or that shall prate of what by Shaddai and Emmanuel is intended. This, therefore, was accordingly done. My lord Will-be-will hearkened to his lord and master, went willingly after the commandment, and, with all the diligence he could, kept any that would be from going out abroad, or that sought to bring these tidings to Mansoul, from coming into the town. Secondly, this done, in the next place, Diabolus, that he might make Mansoul as sure as he could, frames and imposes a new oath and horrible covenant upon the townsfolk, to wit, that they should never desert him nor his government, nor yet betray him, nor seek to alter his laws, but that they should own, confess, stand by, and acknowledge him for their rightful king, in defiance to any that do, or hereafter shall, by any pretence, law, or title whatever, lay claim to the town of Mansoul, thinking belike that Shaddai had not power to absolve them from this covenant with death and agreement with hell. Nor did the silly Mansoul stick or boggle at all at this most monstrous engagement, but, as if it had been a sprat in the mouth of a whale, they swallowed it without any chewing. Were they troubled at all? Nay, they rather bragged and boasted of their so brave fidelity to the tyrant, their pretended king, swearing that they would never be changelings, nor forsake their old lord for a new. Thus did Diabolus tie poor Mansoul fast. Thirdly, but jealousy, that never thinks itself strong enough, put him in the next place upon another exploit, which was yet more, if possible, to debauch this town of Mansoul, wherefore he caused by the hand of one Mr. Filth an odious, nasty, lascivious piece of beastliness to be drawn up in writing, and to be set upon the castle gates, whereby he granted and gave license to all his true and trusty sons in Mansoul to do whatsoever their lustful appetites prompted them to do, and that no man was to let, hinder, or control them, upon pain of incurring the displeasure of their prince. Now this he did for these reasons. 1. That the town of Mansoul might be yet made weaker and weaker, and so more unable, should tidings come that their redemption was designed, to believe, hope, or consent to the truth thereof. For reason says, the bigger the sinner, the less grounds of hopes of mercy. 2. The second reason was, if perhaps Emmanuel, the son of Shaddai their king, by seeing the horrible and profane doings of the town of Mansoul, might repent, though entered into a covenant of redeeming them, of pursuing that covenant of their redemption. For he knew that Shaddai was holy, and that his son Emmanuel was holy. Yea, he knew it by woeful experience. For his iniquity and sin was Diabolus cast from the highest orbs. Wherefore what more rational than for him to conclude that thus, for sin, it might fare with man's soul? But fearing also lest this knot should break, he bethinks himself of another, to wit, fourthly, to endeavour to possess all hearts in the town of Mansoul, that Shaddai was raising an army, to come to overthrow and utterly to destroy this town of Mansoul. And this he did to forestall any tidings that might come to their ears of their deliverance. For, thought he, if I first bruit this, the tidings that shall come after will all be swallowed up of this. For what else will Mansoul say, when they shall hear that they must be delivered, but that the true meaning is, Shaddai intends to destroy them? Wherefore he summons the whole town into the market-place, and there, with deceitful tongue, thus he addresses himself unto them. Gentlemen, and my very good friends, you are all, as you know, my legal subjects, and men of the famous town of Mansoul. You know how, from the first day that I have been with you until now, I have behaved myself among you, and what liberty and great privileges you have enjoyed under my government, I hope to your honour and mine, and also to your content and delight. Now, my famous Mansoul, a noise of trouble there is abroad, of trouble to the town of Mansoul. Sorry I am thereof for your sakes, for I received but now by the post from my lord Lucifer, and he useth to have good intelligence, that your old king Shaddai is raising an army to come against you, to destroy you root and branch. And this, O Mansoul, is now the cause that at this time I have called you together, namely, to advise what in this juncture is best to be done. For my part I am but one, and can with ease shift for myself, did I list to seek my own ease, and to leave my Mansoul in all the danger. But my heart is so firmly united to you, and so unwilling am I to leave you, that I am willing to stand and fall with you, to the utmost hazard that shall befall me. What say you, O my Mansoul? Will you now desert your old friend, or do you think of standing by me?" Then, as one man with one mouth, they cried out together, "Let him die the death that will not." Then said Diabolus again, "It is in vain for us to hope for quarter, for this king knows not how to show it. True, perhaps, he, at his first sitting down before us, will talk of and pretend to mercy, that thereby, with the more ease and less trouble, he may again make himself the master of man's soul. Whatever therefore he shall say, believe not one syllable or tittle of it. For all such language is but to overcome us, and to make us, while we wallow in our blood, the trophies of his merciless victory. My mind is, therefore, that we resolve to the last man to resist him, and not to believe him upon any terms, for in at that door will come our danger. But shall we be flattered out of our lives? I hope you know more of the rudiments of politics than to suffer yourself so pitifully to be served. But suppose he should, if he get us to yield, save some of our lives, or the lives of some of them that are underlings in man's soul. What help will that be to you that are the chief of the town, especially you whom I have set up, and whose greatness has been procured by you through your faithful sticking to me? And suppose again that he should give quarter to every one of you. Be sure he will bring you into that bondage under which you were captivated before, or a worse, and then what good will your lives do you? Shall you with him live in pleasure as you do now? No, no. You must be bound by laws that will pinch you, and be made to do that which at present is hateful to you. I am for you, if you are for me, and it is better to die valiantly than to live like pitiful slaves. But, I say, the life of a slave will be counted a life too good for man's soul now. Blood, blood, nothing but blood, is in every blast of Shaddai's trumpet against poor man's soul now. Pray be concerned. I hear he is coming. Up and stand to your arms, that now, while you have any leisure, I may learn you some feats of war. Armour for you I have, and by me it is. Yea, and it is sufficient for man's soul from top to toe. Nor can you be hurt by what his force can do, if you shall keep it well girt and fastened about you. Come, therefore, to my castle, and welcome, and harness yourselves for the war. There is helmet, breastplate, sword and shield, and what not, that will make you fight like men. 1. My helmet, otherwise called an headpiece, is hope of doing well at last, what lives soever you live. This is that which they had who said that they should have peace, though they walked in the wickedness of their heart, to add drunkenness to thirst. A piece of approved armour this is, and whoever has it and can hold it, so long no arrow, dart, sword, or shield can hurt him. This therefore keep on, and thou wilt keep off many a blow, my man's soul. 2. My breastplate is a breastplate of iron. I had it forged in mine own country, and all my soldiers are armed therewith. In plain language, it is a hard heart as hard as iron, and as much past feeling as a stone, the which if you get and keep, neither mercy shall win you, nor judgment fright you. This therefore is a piece of armour most necessary for all to put on that hate Shaddai, and that would fight against him under my banner. 3. My sword is a tongue that is set on fire of hell, and that can bend itself to speak evil of Shaddai, his son, his ways, and people. Use this, it has been tried 1,000 times twice told. Whoever hath it keeps it, and makes that use of it as I would have him, can never be conquered by mine enemy. 4. My shield is unbelief, or calling into question the truth of the word, or all the sayings that speak of the judgment that Shaddai has appointed for wicked men. Use this shield. Many attempts he has made upon it, and sometimes, it is true, it has been bruised. But they that have writ of the wars of Emmanuel against my servants have testified that he could do no mighty work there because of their unbelief. Now, to handle this weapon of mine aright, it is not to believe things because they are true, or what sort or by whomsoever asserted. If he speaks of judgment, care not for it. If he speaks of mercy, care not for it. If he promises, if he swears that he would do to man's soul, if it turns no hurt but good, regard not what is said. Question the truth of all, for it is to wield the shield of unbelief aright, and as my servants ought and do. And he that cloth otherwise loves me not, nor do I count him but an enemy to me. 5. Another part or piece, said Diabolus, of mine excellent armour, is a dumb and prayerless spirit, a spirit that scorns to cry for mercy. Wherefore be you, my man's soul, sure that you make use of this. What? Cry for quarter? Never do that, if you would be mine. I know you are stout men, and am sure that I have clad you with that which is armour of proof. Wherefore to cry to Shaddai for mercy, let that be far from you. Besides all this I have a maul, firebrands, arrows, and death, all good hand-weapons, and such as will do execution. After he had thus furnished his men with armour and arms, he addressed himself to them in such like words as these. Remember, quoth he, that I am your rightful king, and that you have taken an oath and entered into covenant to be true to me and my cause. I say, remember this, and show yourselves stout and valiant men of man's soul. Remember also the kindness that I have always showed to you, and that without your petition I have granted to you external things, wherefore the privileges, grants, immunities, profits, and honours wherewith I have endowed you, do call for at your hands returns of loyalty, my lion-like men of man's soul, and when so fit a time to show it as when another shall seek to take my dominion over you into his own hands. One word more, and I have done. Can we but stand and overcome this one shock or brunt, I doubt not but in little time all the world will be ours. And when that day comes, my true hearts, I will make you kings, princes, and captains. And what brave days shall we have then!" Diabolus, having thus armed and forearmed his servants and vassals in man's soul against their good and lawful king Shaddai, in the next place he doubleth his guards at the gates of the town, and he takes himself to the castle, which was his stronghold. His vassals also, to show their wills and supposed but ignoble gallantry, exercise themselves in their arms every day, and teach one another feats of war. They also defied their enemies, and sang up the praises of their tyrant. They threatened also what men they would be, if ever things should rise so high as a war between Shaddai and their king. End of chapter 2.